This week's Torah portion is Vayechi. It's the last Parsha, the last portion in the book of Genesis. And it's the end of the Jewish people as a family. We're about to transition from the family of the Jewish people into the nation of the Jewish people in the next book of the book of Exodus. The thread I want to bring out in this week's Torah portion is the thread of using our language, using speech, when we hold back and when we speak, and the tension between when it's good to speak and when it's good to hold back. So in this week's Torah portion, we understand that Jacob knew he was going to die. He's sick, he's on his deathbed. And by the way, the Medrash teaches us that Jacob asked God to make him sick before he died. That sickness would be an indicator that he was about to die, and having a knowledge of when he was about to die would allow him the possibility to then say goodbye to his children, to bless his children, to put his affairs in order, and to position himself ready to transition into the next world. So this was something that Jacob asked for. He asked for sickness before he died so that he would know to put his affairs in order. So he gets sick, he knows he's going to die, and he calls his children to his bedside, and he uses his language to bless them. He blesses every single one of his children, and he blesses his grandchildren. He blesses his grandchildren, Ephraim and Manasseh, and that's the blessing that is given by parents to their children on Friday nights, that we bless our sons, that they should be like Ephraim and Manasseh. We use our language to bless our children. And the idea of using language to bless is an idea of opening up the channels of goodness and love and godliness into the world, that God is the source of all blessing. When we say in the liturgy, Baruch Atah Hashem, like blessed are you God, really what we're saying is you, God, are the source of all blessing. All blessing comes into the world through you, God. So when I recognize that and I use my language to open up channels of blessing, and that blessing should be showered into the world and showered onto the children and showered onto the grandchildren. That's what Jacob's doing when he uses his capacity of language to bring more godliness into the world. And we have that capacity too. We can use our language to bless. We can use our language to evoke godliness and bring godliness into the world, just like Jacob did when he blessed his children and his grandchildren. First example of a grandparent blessing a grandchild is in this week's Torah portion. Okay, so language as a way of blessing, of bringing godliness and goodliness and love and expansiveness and overflow into the world. Another way in which language is used in this week's Torah portion is when the brothers come to Joseph after they have buried Jacob. He's died, he's been buried in the cave of Machpelah, and the brothers come to Joseph and they say to Joseph, our father Jacob told us that you should be kind to us, that you should forgive us for selling you into slavery, that you should forgive us for anything we did to harm you, that you should be kind to us and you should be good to us. But we know that Jacob never knew what happened to Joseph, what actually happened. That Jacob never knew that the brothers had sold him into slavery. So the brothers are using language to bring peace between the brothers, but they actually, say all of our commentators, lying. That Jacob never said to them, go to Joseph and ask for forgiveness and ask for peace, and that I use my name. That wasn't something that Jacob actually said to his sons. So what we see here is an example of using our language for peaceful gain, for peaceful results, but perhaps sacrificing the truth on the altar of peace. That the brothers said to Joseph something that didn't actually happen because they're looking for peace. So that's a use of language that we can discuss, but that was a use of language that was aimed at creating peace. In our oral tradition, we understand that we can sacrifice truth for peace. If we think a bride is ugly under the chuppah, or when she's at the wedding, we should say that she's beautiful. Even if we don't think she's beautiful, we should say she's beautiful. We sacrifice truth for peace. We bring peace between brothers. We bring peace between husband and wife. Like, the goal of peace is very, very high in our hierarchy of values. And sometimes it's appropriate and okay to sacrifice truth for the goal of peace. And here's an example given in our Torah where the brothers say to Joseph, Dad said, even though he didn't, we want you to treat us peacefully and to not bear a grudge against us. And Joseph is going to do that, and he does frame it as it was all in God's hands, and you did want evil against me, but I don't want evil against you, and I will treat you well, and I will take care of you. And so there is peace between the brothers. Another example of where language is used well is on the deathbed when Jacob is talking to Joseph, and he asks Joseph to swear that he will bury him, that Jacob asked Joseph and swear that you will bury me in the cave of Machpelah, in Hebron, that you promise, Joseph, that when I die, you will bury me in the cave of Machpelah in Hebron with my ancestors, with the foremothers and the forefathers, that I will be buried in the cave in Hebron. And Joseph says, yes, I swear that I will bury you there. The Medrash teaches us that Joseph uses this as an opportunity to speak to his father and say to him, why didn't you bury my mother, Rachel, in the cave of Machpelah? Why wasn't she buried in that cave? Why was Rachel buried on the road in Bethlehem? Why was she not transported by you, Jacob, to the cave of Machpelah to be buried with all the ancestors? So here was a conversation, and there are answers given to that, which I'm not going to expound upon, but I want to use it as an example where Joseph uses this as a launching off of using his language to ask a question, to be curious, to not bear a grudge, and not to not understand what Jacob's understanding was, why his mother wasn't buried along with the other ancestors, the foremothers and forefathers, why she was buried on the road. And presumably it was something that bothered him, and presumably it was something that he didn't know. And so now that Jacob is asking Joseph to bury him in the cave, it's an opportunity for Joseph to use his language to then clarify, to understand, to get to know his father in a different way, and to create some peace between them, because perhaps this was something he was holding a grudge, that he was upset that his mother wasn't buried in the cave of Machpelah, and this is a way of bringing it down, communicating and airing some kind of misunderstanding that might be there, and to create peace between Joseph and his father Jacob by having this conversation about where his mother was buried. So again, using language to resolve conflicts, to air a misunderstanding, or to try to understand the other, using language for that capacity. And the last thing I'd like to bring out is the way in which there is silence in this week's Torah portion. So we have times where we speak. We speak to bring peace between people. We speak to air out our differences or our misunderstandings. We use speech to bestow blessings on each other, to bring godliness into the world. But there are times where we have to hold back, and there are times where we don't speak. And a couple of those examples in this week's Torah portion is where Jacob is on his deathbed, and he calls all his children together, and he has a prophecy. He has a capacity to know when the end of days will be, what will happen at the end of days, when the Messiah is going to come, and what's going to happen at the end of days. And he wants to tell this to his children. So he gathers his children together and he says, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen at the end of days. Wouldn't we all like to know what's going to happen? And at the point where he's about to impart this information, he loses his prophecy. He loses his capacity to tell them, and he can't tell them, and he falls silent. Various understandings of what this is, that Jacob thinks maybe the brothers aren't united, and it's that response that they have to him where they say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Listen, Israel, we are one. We are all one. So it's not because the brothers aren't united. Perhaps it's because it's not knowledge that we're supposed to have. We don't need to have that knowledge. We are supposed to live without that knowledge. We're supposed to live in a space where we won't know when the end of days are going to happen. We don't know when the Messiah is coming. We have a tradition that the Messiah is coming, and there will be a resurrection of the dead, and there will be an end of days, but we don't know exactly how it's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And in this week's Torah portion, silence falls upon Jacob such that he can't reveal that truth. There's a holding back of that knowledge such that we can live in the world the way we're supposed to without knowing. We're not supposed to go to fortune tellers. We're not supposed to know what's going to happen in the future. We're supposed to live with hope, with faith, with an understanding that it will, but not exactly when. So his silence on behalf of Jacob, he's not given the capacity to give over this information. There's silence. That's where silence is appropriate. And the last example before I finish is all the brothers, Joseph, Benjamin, and all the other sons of Jacob all know what happened to Jacob. They all know that he was sold, or that he was thrown into a pit, that they did not want him. They wanted to get rid of Joseph. But none of them tell Jacob what happened. None of them tell the father what happened. They hold back. They all understand what grief and pain this would cause their father to know what actually happened to Joseph. So they have this information, but they're holding back and they're not telling it to Jacob. And in fact, when Jacob comes down to Egypt and he's living with Joseph, Joseph puts him in Goshen, which is an area far away from where Joseph is living. And there's various explanations as to why why Joseph places his father Jacob far away. And one of the reasons given is because Joseph wanted to safeguard any possibility that Joseph would reveal what actually happened to him, that it might slip out in conversation, that it might come out somehow. And in order to prevent that from happening, in order for the father to find out, which would cause so much grief and so much heartache and so on, he positions him far away as a safeguard so he would never know. So here's where there's a holding back of speech, where speech is not used because of a greater good of not causing so much distress to the father. So the thread of what I'm pulling out of this week's Torah portion is when speech is appropriate, when speech is good, when speech has a purpose to be used, and when speech has to be withheld. So we have speech that's used as a blessing, to give blessings. We have speech that's used to bring peace between people, even if sometimes we have to lie or not tell the whole truth, or speech that's used to resolve conflict or misunderstandings between people, where Joseph asks his father why his mother wasn't buried in the cave with the other ancestry. Or we have the withholding of speech, the withholding that Jacob couldn't tell his children when the end of days would happen, or how that would all unfold, or when the brothers hold back from telling the father what actually happened to Joseph, all in the name of peace, all in the name of creating a brotherhood between people and reconciliation. And that's what is created at the end of the book of Genesis. We end on all the brothers being united, all the brothers saying, the Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. We know that God is one, that there's only oneness, that we're all united, that Ephraim and Manasseh, who are the grandchildren of Joseph, receive a blessing from the grandfather Jacob. And the blessing is given to them because they have no sibling rivalry. They are able to exist in exile in Egypt and still stay strong to their relationship to God and to the Jewish people, that they are part of the Jewish people, as are the other brothers. And there's this oneness and unity and brotherhood that the children of Israel have as we transition from the family to the nation of Israel as we enter into the book of Exodus, which we will start next week.